Wealthy mother-in-law called me the help at a gala, she said loudly. Why is she even here? Thinking I was a caterer, but when the CEO greeted me with our youngest board member is finally here, she dropped her wine. This happened at a gala my husband and I attended recently. I'm married to Charles, who comes from an extremely wealthy family. His mother, Margot, is, well, let's just say she's not the biggest fan of me. I'm not from money, and I never have been. But I've always tried to keep a good relationship with Charles's family. At this particular gala, Margot did something that embarrassed me in front of everyone. She loudly called me the help, assuming I was just a server. It stung, but I didn't want to make a scene. Then, something unexpected happened. The CEO of the company Charles works for, and where I work as well, called me our youngest board member. Margot's face dropped, she literally spilled her wine, and the entire room went silent for a moment. It was a turning point for me, and I thought I'd share it here to get some perspective. I never imagined my life would intersect with that world. The world of fancy galas, power suits, and endless glasses of champagne. I'm just not that person. My background is working class, I come from a modest family, and I've always had to hustle. I met Charles years ago when we were both working for a startup. We clicked immediately, and it felt like nothing could stop us. Charles is everything I'm not: charming, confident, and from old money. His family is known around town, and his mother, Margot, is at the top of the social ladder. Everyone knows her, everyone respects her, out of fear or admiration, I can't tell. She's tall, immaculate, and every time I'm around her, I feel like she's dissecting me in her mind, deciding whether I'm worthy of her son. To be honest, I never really cared about impressing Margot. I didn't need her approval. But I did want to at least feel like I belonged in her world, even if I wasn't the most natural fit. That night, however, things went way beyond anything I'd ever expected. The gala was being held at the Willoughby Estate, a sprawling mansion in the heart of town. Think marble floors, grand chandeliers, and walls covered with priceless artwork. The kind of event where you wear black tie, and you're expected to be on your best behavior. It's the sort of world I can hardly recognize, let alone be a part of. But there I was, walking through the doors with Charles, my heart pounding in my chest. I had spent the past few days trying to perfect my look for the event, picking out the dress, the shoes, the accessories. Everything had to be just right, but deep down I was still feeling like a fish out of water. This wasn't my crowd, not by a long shot. Margot was already there, standing in the middle of the room, chatting with some of her usual socialite friends. She was impossible to miss, her presence like a beacon in the sea of elegant, well-dressed people. As soon as she saw me, her eyes narrowed just slightly. I could feel her sizing me up from across the room. Charles greeted his mother with a warm hug. She looked at me, then back at Charles, her expression flat. "Glad you could make it," she said in her usual stiff tone, barely acknowledging me. "How's work been, dear?" Margot continued, turning her attention back to Charles, dismissing me as if I were some sort of background character in their conversation. I didn't take it personally. It was just Margot being Margot. But that night, something inside me was different. Maybe it was the pressure of the situation, maybe it was how much I had worked to get here, but I wasn't going to let her treat me like this anymore. At least, that's what I told myself. The evening unfolded in that awkward, quiet way that events like this tend to. I stayed by Charles's side, greeting a few colleagues and listening to speeches, all while trying to ignore the whispers behind my back. I could feel Margot's disapproval like a physical weight on my shoulders. Then came the moment that changed everything. I was standing near the hors d'oeuvres table when I overheard Margot talking to a group of people. Her voice was cold, but loud enough for me to catch every word. "Why is she even here?" she muttered, her voice dripping with disdain. "Isn't she one of the caterers? I thought this was supposed to be a special event." Someone must have let her in by mistake. I froze. I had been trying to blend in, but now, I could feel every pair of eyes on me. I wasn't the caterer. I wasn't anyone's servant. I was here because Charles and I had worked hard for this life, and I had every right to be there just as much as anyone else in that room. It wasn't just the words that stung, it was the way she said them. The casual dismissal. The arrogance. I didn't want to make a scene, so I just took a deep breath and tried to focus on the event. But it wasn't easy. I was standing there, feeling humiliated, when suddenly I heard a voice behind me. "There you are. Our youngest board member is finally here." I turned around, and there was Edward Pritchard, the CEO of the company Charles worked for. Edward was older, tall, and the kind of person who carried himself like he had everything under control. He smiled at me warmly, his eyes lighting up. "I've been telling everyone that you'd be here soon. The team is eager to hear more about the new project you're working on. It's been a pleasure watching you grow, and I think the future of the board is in good hands with people like you." His words were kind, but it was the way he said them that threw everyone in the room into a stunned silence. For a moment, no one knew what to do. I could feel every gaze turning to me, their confusion palpable. And then I saw her. Margot's face drained of color. Her expression went from one of controlled disdain to sheer shock. The glass of wine she had been holding in her hand slipped, and I watched as it shattered on the floor, spilling red wine across the polished marble. She was still standing there, mouth agape, staring at me as though she had just seen a ghost. I don't know how long the silence lasted, but it felt like an eternity. Edward, completely unaware of the social dynamics unfolding in the room, continued chatting with me, oblivious to the tension building behind us. "It's wonderful to see such passion from someone so young," he said with a wide grin. "We're lucky to have you on the board." Margot hadn't moved. She was frozen in place, eyes wide, mouth trembling as if she were about to say something but couldn't find the words. Her hand shook as she tried to gather herself, and she finally muttered something about needing to clean up the mess. But the damage was already done. The whole room had heard what Edward had said, and the once dominant matriarch of the Willoughby family looked smaller, like she had lost her grip on everything she had worked so hard to control. I didn't say anything more. I could have, but there was no need. The truth was out there, and in a way, Margot's worst fear had just been exposed. As the night wore on, I could see people watching me with a newfound respect. Some of them even came over to ask about the projects I was working on, asking for my thoughts on the future of the company. It felt strange to be in the spotlight like that, but at the same time, it felt liberating. Margot, on the other hand, stayed distant. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. In fact, she made a point of avoiding me, as if she were trying to pretend that the earlier incident had never happened. But I knew better. I had earned my place in that room, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel small again. I don't know what happened next with Margot. She never directly apologized, of course, but something had shifted. I think she realized that I wasn't the same person she had once tried to dismiss. It wasn't about me seeking revenge, it was about me finding my own space in a world I didn't belong to, and proving to myself that I could stand my ground. When we left the gala, Charles turned to me. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm more than fine. I don't know what the future holds for me and Margot, but that night was a turning point. I realized that no matter where I came from or how much money I had every right to be here. And no one, especially not Margot, could take that away from me." As Charles and I drove back home that evening, the air was thick with unspoken thoughts. He kept glancing over at me, his eyes searching, trying to gauge my mood. I didn't want to talk about the gala right then, mostly because I wasn't sure how to even begin processing everything that had just happened. But I could feel his concern, and I could tell he was trying to decide whether to bring it up or not. The quiet hum of the car filled the space between us. My mind replayed the moment when Margot dropped her glass. The shock in her face still lingered in my thoughts, and for a brief second, I wondered if I had been too harsh. Maybe I shouldn't have let her get under my skin so much. But then again, it wasn't about me retaliating. It was about me finally being seen for who I really was, not some outsider, not a token wife, but someone who deserved respect. "Hey, you all right?" Charles finally asked, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. I turned toward him and nodded. "Yeah, I'm good." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. The drive to our house was longer than usual, maybe because I didn't want the night to end. I needed to digest everything. My thoughts were scattered, and I couldn't help but feel the sting of Margot's words from earlier in the evening. It had hurt more than I cared to admit. When we arrived at home, I went straight to the kitchen. I didn't feel like going to bed right away. I needed a moment to myself, so I made myself a cup of tea, my hands shaking slightly as I held the warm mug. The kitchen was quiet. It was the same kitchen we'd always had, in the same house I'd helped Charles find when we got married. A far cry from the grand estate we'd just left. Charles eventually joined me, leaning against the counter, watching me as I took a sip of the tea. He didn't say anything, just waiting for me to say the words I wasn't quite ready to speak. "I've never seen her like that before," I finally said. "I mean, I know she's always been distant, but tonight, it felt different." Charles sighed, his eyes meeting mine. "I don't know what to say. You know, she's never really liked you, but I think even she knows she went too far tonight. I've never seen her react like that to anyone." I could feel a knot tighten in my stomach at the thought of Margot's shock. It wasn't just surprise. It was disbelief, as though she couldn't fathom that I might actually be something more than the help in her eyes. "I didn't do it to embarrass her," I said softly, putting the mug down on the counter. I wanted her to see me for who I am. Not just your wife, but someone who's worked hard for everything I've achieved. I don't need her approval, but it would be nice if she saw me as more than just someone who doesn't belong." Charles reached out and touched my arm. His touch was gentle, but there was something in his expression that told me he didn't fully understand. He hadn't seen the years of subtle judgment and quiet dismissal I had endured. He didn't know what it felt like to be constantly underestimated. "I know it's been tough for you, but you've got to understand, she's not going to change overnight. She's not the easiest person to deal with. And I guess I never really realized how much it was affecting you," he said, his voice laced with guilt. I didn't know how to respond. On one hand, I wanted him to take my side. On the other, I didn't want him to feel caught in the middle of this tension between me and his mother. But the reality was, I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. "Maybe she'll come around eventually," he added, trying to offer me comfort. I shook my head. "I don't know if she ever will. But I'm done trying to make her like me. I'm done." There was a long pause between us, the weight of the evening settling in. After a few moments, Charles let out a deep breath. "Well, at least I can tell you this. I'm proud of you. What you did tonight, standing up for yourself in front of all those people, including her, it took guts. And you've got a lot more courage than she or anyone else gives you credit for." I looked up at him, surprised by his words. "Thanks, Charles. But I don't think it was about courage. It was just, I'm tired. Tired of being invisible." The days that followed the gala were filled with uncertainty. I didn't hear from Margot, not that I expected to. But it made me wonder if she'd try to repair the rift or if she'd just let it fester. The quiet tension between us was palpable whenever we were in the same room. And I could tell she was trying to pretend like nothing had happened. But things had shifted, and she knew it. I had been trying to navigate this strange new world for years, but after that night, something inside me had changed. I wasn't the same woman who had meekly smiled and nodded when she made her condescending remarks. I wasn't the woman who would just quietly accept being dismissed. At work, I was slowly gaining more recognition. The board had started looking at me with a new respect, and I could tell that my contributions were being valued. The respect I had wanted from Margot, I was beginning to get from the people I worked with day in and day out. It wasn't the same as being accepted by her, but it felt like a victory nonetheless. I couldn't tell if Margot's coldness was a result of her pride being wounded or if it was something deeper. Either way, I wasn't going to beg for her approval. Not anymore. And yet, every time I saw her at family gatherings or events, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a new kind of tension between us. It wasn't just the typical indifference I had come to expect from her. There was something more to it now, something that made me uneasy. One Sunday, about a week after the gala, Charles and I were invited to one of Margot's infamous Sunday dinners. It wasn't an invitation I was eager to accept, but Charles had insisted. He said it was important for family unity, and honestly, part of me wanted to show her that I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I wasn't going to cower in the corner of her world. The dinner was as lavish as I had expected: white tablecloths, crystal wine glasses, a 5-course meal. The same perfectionist precision Margot always put into every event. But as we sat down at the table, I noticed something different. There was a coldness to Margot's demeanor that wasn't there before. She barely looked at me, her eyes fixed on her plate, but when she did glance my way, there was a faint hint of resentment in her gaze. It was subtle, but it was there. The conversation flowed around me, safe topics like the weather and family friends, but it felt stilted, as though everyone was walking on eggshells. The air between me and Margot was charged, heavy with unspoken words. After a few minutes, she finally broke the silence. "I suppose you've been getting quite a bit of attention lately," she said, her voice clipped, almost casual, but I could hear the undercurrent of judgment in her words. I paused, unsure of where this was going. "I'm just doing my job," I replied carefully, trying to keep my tone neutral. "You're certainly making your mark," she said, her lips curling slightly, though there was no smile in her eyes. "But I do wonder, do you really think you belong in the circles you're moving in now?" I could feel the tension building, but this time I didn't flinch. "I'm not asking for permission," I said, meeting her gaze. "I'm not trying to belong to anything. I'm just here, doing what I do." Margot's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might say something cutting. But she didn't. Instead, she simply looked away, back to her plate, the conversation shifting to something else entirely. But the words were out there now. The divide between us had widened, and it was clear that things would never be the same again. As the dinner continued, I could feel the distance between Margot and me widening with each passing minute. The air was thick with her disapproval, but I wasn't about to let her continue treating me like I didn't matter. I had endured this for years, silently playing the part of the humble wife who was never good enough. But now, I was done. Done trying to win her favor, done shrinking myself into someone I wasn't just to appease her. The rest of the dinner passed uneventfully, with Margot retreating into her usual cold demeanor. She made pointed remarks about things that didn't quite land right, little jabs disguised as conversation starters, but I didn't let them bother me. I had learned that silence was sometimes the loudest response. Charles noticed the tension too, but he seemed unsure of how to handle it. Every now and then, his eyes flicked between me and his mother, his face creased with concern. But we both knew that nothing would change unless I took matters into my own hands. A few days after that awkward dinner, I got an unexpected email from Edward Pritchard, the CEO of the company Charles worked for. Edward had always been polite to me, but this time, his message carried a different tone. "Hello, Ms. Wells," the email began, "I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to personally invite you to an upcoming high-level meeting with several key stakeholders. We'll be discussing some exciting developments that are sure to push the company forward. We would love to have you present, as your input has been invaluable to the team." I read the email a couple of times, disbelief rising in my chest. The high-level meeting wasn't just any corporate gathering, it was an annual board meeting, one where the most influential people in the company made major decisions that affected the future of the business. For the CEO to specifically request my presence felt surreal. I was both excited and nervous, but I knew it was an opportunity one couldn't pass up. But what made this even more interesting was the timing. The meeting was scheduled for the very same weekend as a gala hosted by the Willoughby family. The same event where Margot had humiliated me just weeks before. I could almost hear her voice in my head, dismissing me as the help while the rest of the social elite circled around her like loyal subjects. I knew what I had to do. The day of the gala arrived, and I was already making plans for how I was going to handle the situation. I had no intention of attending the Willoughby event. I had decided, instead, to prioritize the board meeting. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about proving something to myself. To Margot. To everyone who had ever doubted me. I had spent the morning preparing, dressing in a sharp, tailored suit that would set me apart from the usual corporate attire. This wasn't just a meeting. This was my chance to show the world, and particularly Margot, that I had a place in this world too. A place earned through my own work and talent, not through my husband's family name. As the gala began, I was already seated in the boardroom, a sense of quiet triumph building inside me. Edward greeted me when I arrived at the meeting, his smile genuine and warm. "It's great to see you here," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to have me sitting alongside the most powerful people in the company. The meeting was intense and engaging. I contributed ideas, offered solutions, and felt my confidence growing with every passing minute. I realized, with surprising clarity, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. No one had held me back, not my background, not Margot's disdain, not even my own self-doubt. Meanwhile, at the Willoughby Gala, I could only imagine what was unfolding. I knew that Margot would expect me to be there, wearing some ill-fitting dress and awkwardly trying to navigate a world that was never meant for me. But she was about to be faced with a reality she had never considered. It wasn't until the following week that I got the confirmation I needed. I had just finished a meeting at the office when I received a phone call from Charles. His voice was strained, though he tried to sound calm. "Hey, I need to talk to you about something," he said. "Mom, well, she's been acting weird lately. I think she's having a hard time processing what happened at the gala. She keeps talking about you, about the fact that you weren't there. She's upset, and honestly, I don't know how to handle it." I could hear the tension in his voice. It wasn't just about his mother being upset, it was about his loyalty being tested. But I wasn't going to apologize for standing my ground. "Charles, you have to understand," I said softly but firmly. "I couldn't go to the gala. It wasn't about disrespecting your family. It was about taking a step forward in my own life, my own career. I don't need to be in that world to prove my worth." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear Charles processing my words. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now. "I get it. I don't know how to fix things with Mom." "You don't have to fix anything," I said. "This is something she has to deal with on her own." That night, I received another email, this time from Edward again. It was short but full of meaning. "Ms. Wells, I wanted to personally congratulate you for your incredible contributions during the board meeting. Your ideas and leadership are exactly what we need moving forward. I'm pleased to inform you that the board has voted unanimously to offer you a seat as a full board member. Welcome aboard." I read the email twice, my heart racing. This wasn't just a promotion or a recognition of my hard work. It was a sign of my true arrival in the corporate world, a world that Margot had always assumed I didn't belong in. But that wasn't the most satisfying part. What really struck me was the timing. Edward's email arrived just moments after I had ended my conversation with Charles. It felt like the universe was aligning, reaffirming that the path I was on was the right one, even if it meant leaving some people behind. A few weeks later, Charles and I attended another family gathering, this time, It was a casual lunch with just a few of his relatives. Margot was there too, though her demeanor had shifted. She wasn't as cold as she had been after the gala, but there was a noticeable distance between us. We sat down to eat, and for a while, the conversation was polite but devoid of anything truly meaningful. The air was still thick with unspoken words, but this time it felt different. There was no more pretending. Margot, I could tell, was still processing everything. She hadn't fully accepted it yet, but she was trying. Then, out of the blue, she looked at me. For the first time in a long while, her gaze wasn't filled with disdain. It was something else, something closer to respect. I hear you've been doing quite well at work, she said, her voice softer than usual. Congratulations on whatever it is you're doing. I never thought you'd fit into this world, but I suppose you proved me wrong. I looked at her, my heart pounding. I didn't feel the need to say anything back. Her words, though not an apology, were a kind of acknowledgement that I had earned my place. And that, in the end, was enough. Charles, who had been quiet until then, smiled. I think it's safe to say we've all learned something in the past few months. I nodded, offering Margot a small, genuine smile. I think so too. In that moment, I realized that I hadn't needed her approval all along. I had everything I needed within myself, my work, my achievements, and my own strength. Margot's respect, however grudging, was the final piece of the puzzle. I didn't need revenge in the form of cruelty or public humiliation. The best revenge was living my life on my own terms, succeeding in a world she never thought I'd belong to, and making my own mark, not just as Charles's wife, but as the woman I had always been meant to be. And in the end, that was far more satisfying than anything I could have ever imagined.